or does not need to comply with these sort of DMCA takedown notices. But she has a bunch of ads that pop up when you go to that page now.
So the liability is a failure of the DMCA. It seems like what's happening is if you have a very passionate argument about something and you want to talk about it online, and someone doesn't want you to, you use the takedown notices and it will most likely come down, as if you are using copyrighted material to make your point. And when the ISPs are motivated by profit and they're not non-profits like Project DoD, it's difficult. They're most likely not, this takes too much time. They're not going to stand up for you. And also, we have some users that they've lost their Twitter accounts, their Facebook accounts. Those have been DMCA'd as well. Those are down, but at least some of the content for the websites or blogs, whatever, resides on Project DoD. We've been able to preserve that, while Twitter and Facebook, it's come right down for the same type of content. So if this continues with this trend with the takedown notices, we think it's not heading in a good direction.
Yeah, and I think this is an important one to me, just because it seems obvious to me that if you have a dispute with somebody over content, that the two most interested parties should really be the ones that should handle that dispute. And the second you try and tie the liability of a third party that only cares about liability to the content, you really don't have a sort of a world that's going to facilitate fair and open discussion of anything. So I don't know if Tiffany would say this as strongly, but I think fundamentally that the takedown provisions of the DMCA, the sort of guilty until proven innocent approach with market pressure, and I don't think this is a mistake necessarily, I think that that's probably the biggest failing of the DMCA's altogether. Well, okay, I shouldn't say the DMCA, but I think that that is a failing that's larger than any of the ones that we talked about before, which is simply that really the ISPs should not be sharing liability with the content. Just like everything else out there, they should require a court order to take it down. And so I'm not going to get into too many examples of this, but I just wanted to say that we've entered this de facto state of censorship out on the internet, and we've seen all of these providers and many more take down people or users on their service, not allow them to file a counter notice, and they've wound up on us specifically. So, and this is WordPress, GoDaddy, Network Solutions, a bunch of other smaller providers that have had this happen. Can technology fix these censorship problems? Well, there might be a couple technical solutions. We're going to give a quick overview of Tor Hidden Service, and I want to say thank you to the Tor folks for letting me use their slides, or use the images to illustrate how Hidden Service Protocol works. Now, I'm going to assume that most of you in the audience know how Tor works in general, how circuits are established. This is just sort of like plus on that. It's like a one step up, like how you can use it to provide a service from Tor. I'm also going to talk about jurisdiction hopping solutions. And then we'll talk a little bit about direct action. I think you guys will have fun with that one. For our intents and purposes, we're going to consider Alice to be the user and Bob to be the ISP. Bob is going to create a circuit into the Tor network, and he's going to choose 3 introduction points. And then he's going to list those introduction points with his public key into a directory server. Alice is then going to look at this directory server and for an identifier, which is usually something like foobar dot, well, it's not an easy name. It's some obscure identifier dot onion. And so if you know about this obscure identifier dot onion a priori, you can go to the directory server, look it up, get the public key and the introduction points. Alice is also going to then pick a rendezvous point. And so she's going to create a packet that's basically encrypted with a public key. It has this, this one-time token, and she puts the rendezvous point and sends this through one of the introduction points that Bob's chosen, which then forwards it on to Bob. So Bob, the ISP, now gets that and meets Alice over at the rendezvous point, using the one-time secret in order to authenticate to Alice, yes, you contacted me and this is me. And then they establish a secure encrypted connection. And I think the important point here is, I mean, the arrows aren't really illustrating it, but there's a circuit on either side here, a Tor circuit, that is going to protect Molly. guess you can't really hit that without blinding Tiffany. So that's going to protect the identity of both the ISP and the user in this case. This seems like a completely workable solution for providing censorship-resistant hosting, but there are actually some drawbacks to using Tor. And I don't know if any of you have used it. I'm sure you guys have, actually. But if you use it, you make a little bit of a speed trade-off, right? So there's sort of an efficiency trade-off for trying to use Tor in order to maintain your anonymity or privacy. And it kind of gets a little bit worse because of how the buffers work. If there's a lot of file sharing traffic or large amounts of data going through the Tor network when you're trying to use it. And so what I want to do is kind of talk about a spectrum of users, right? So you have these users that are used to the commodity hosting, and you have users that if they publish their content and their identities are released, they're dead, right? Their governments will kill them. And I think in the former case, the commodity hosting providers do a good job at offering those services. And in the latter case, I think Tor does a really good job. It makes a good trade-off between trying to publish content and also protect the person's identity. But we're in the spectrum of users. We have these users that we've been talking about, right? The ones in the abuse case examples that fall in between. And those people need something that's maybe still a little bit fast, that looks a little bit like traditional hosting, but doesn't suffer all of the censorship implications. And there's another problem with that onion identifier, right? And that is that it's a little bit obscure, but this may be not necessarily a design flaw, but sort of mathematical truth, right? So there's this thing called Zuku's conjecture, which says that one of these names cannot be human, meaningful, secure, and decentralized all at the same time. You can only have two of these three elements. So there's a more friendly interface to this, which would make it so Alice didn't have to look up the identifier from the directory server. Alice could use a normal, say foobar.tortoweb.com. You can, through URL redirects and whatnot, you can get a sort of meaningful name. But the second you do that, of course, you've lost your decentralized naming for something meaningful.
Another way to do this, if Chris talked about the technology, is how about through law? Can we do jurisdiction hopping? How easy is it to do? And I'll tell you, it's not easy. But one of the examples that I found most interesting, and I did a lot of research in law school about this and wrote a thesis about it, was Haven Co. and Sealand. I remember when Ryan Lackey, I believe he was the CTO or CEO of Haven Co., which is the company, and Sealand is what a sovereign nation, or so they state that they are. But they've given presentations at Hope and at DEF CON, and I'm not sure about here at Blackhat, but what this was an offshore gun platform that was used during World War II and is off the coast from the UK. And a group of people that were into pirate radio at the time took this platform they claimed by adverse possession. Although being that it was owned by the government, you can't really own government property by adverse possession, but the UK at that point didn't really care. The pirate radio station actually was a big deal. I think they made a movie about, in the movie it was set in a boat, but I read this was what the inspiration was Sealand. So there's a king and a queen and a prince, and they have their own passports, their own currency, stamps. Those go for quite a bit, but it's quite interesting that they claim that they are a sovereign nation, and under international law and law of the sea actually applies to this as well, is how far off are they off the coast from the UK? And at the time, the UK, their international waters were not, it didn't cover the platform, but since then they've kind of bumped it out. If you look on a map, it kind of goes out around where Sealand is. And Sealand, I believe it was in like 2000, during like the dot-com boom, they decided what they were going to do was do internet, like hosting, a hosting company there, and that was called Haven Co. So Ryan and Avi went out there and set up this company, and they had a lot of servers out there. They claimed that they would not reply or respond to any U.S. subpoenas or warrants that were issued. Now, their connection to the internet, though, was a cable under the ocean. They were saving up to be able to get a satellite uplink, but I don't think that happened. So one of the biggest vulnerabilities for them was that for their internet access for all their clients, it was a cable under the ocean. At any time, the UK could have severed that connection. They didn't have I don't believe at the time, I don't think they had a redundancy. Another problem they had is the King and the Queen, they had universal health care over there, and so if anyone's been to the UK, part of your citizenship of the UK is you're like, oh, okay, I have socialized medicine, I'm a member of the UK. So they got their health care in the UK, and that was something that was a little bit weak for their sovereign nation argument. But one of the things that I remember when I talked to Ryan about this at Hope, I think this has got to be like 3 Hopes ago, when they did a presentation, is what would you do if you received a subpoena? And a Wired article came out, I believe it was in 2000, that was it claimed they had lots of guns on the platform. Also said that the rooms in which they had their servers were full of argon. So if you really wanted to go in and take a box, you had to put on a mask and all that. Well, I don't think Ryan said the argon thing may not have been true, but it was kind of just to ward off some threats. And the guns, I think those were true. It's difficult to get there. You have to take a helicopter or like a really scary boat ride out there. But were they subpoena proof? Well, I believe it was a year or two ago, the King and Queen of Sealand wanted to get the UK to declare them a sovereign nation. And they had a petition going, I believe, with signatures and all that, and they were not successful. And then they had a huge fire, and Sealand was burning. And who came to save them? It was the UK Navy. So they put out the fire, and relying on that type of infrastructure with the UK weakened their jurisdiction type of argument a little bit. But what was difficult was I think I haven't found an example, whether it's Sealand or it's servers in places where the U.S. is going to have trouble if they have subpoenas or warrants they want to serve on people. I would never say that it's subpoena proof, subpoena resistant, just like we are censorship resistant. Proof is difficult to say. So is Sealand a sovereign nation or not? The arguments that I've seen, the academic arguments, even go as far as it's a platform and it's on a pylon that goes into the sea, and it sits on the shelf. This is law of the sea. That is part of the shelf for the UK. Now, whether it's connected, like actually in the shelf, or I looked at some drawings of how Sealand was built, but it was like a boat they sank. This was back in during World War II era. They sank a boat and sand and stuff filled it. So are they their own nation? It's hard to say, but I've read, there was also, I got to mention, there's a great article in Wired about floating islands that are in international waters. So jurisdiction hopping in the future may be some way that you might be able to have censorship-resistant locations. But short of having your own army, I suppose, and your own laws, it's challenging. It would be challenging. But right now, I think it's hard to say that anything is subpoena-proof or jurisdiction, that it's its own jurisdiction that can't be served or found by the U.S. or whatever your government is from which you originate. But when I talk about this, if you are looking to do jurisdiction hopping, I do know there are services out there. In fact, we have a box in Sweden right now where we're putting some stuff such as some content about the case that we're telling you about now. And we're not doing it to obstruct justice. With proper warrants and subpoenas, it's reachable, but it's more difficult. So if you have it's possible, like I said, it's resistant but not proof of these subpoenas and warrants being served for us to turn over or shut down content on a box in Sweden. Iceland is also becoming a country that they're claiming to be a haven for data.
So I want to talk a little bit about what we're working on with regards to jurisdiction hopping. So we're pulling together a bunch of tools that are trying to build this censorship-resistant infrastructure. And we have development nodes in San Jose, we have them in Oakland, and we have one in Sweden. Right